Okay, so looks like the number of people entering the session has stabilized at the moment. So I'll get going. So hello everyone who's here. My name is Dave Bass. I'm a transportation planner with NOACA and a member of the planning team for this event. So here to welcome you all to the second day of the first virtual mini conference of the Greater Cleveland Trails and Greenways Conference programming. Our goal is to host these focused information and training sessions around the topics of trails and bikeways in the years that we're not hosting an in-person conference. We will be hosting an in-person conference in 2023, and we are looking for new members and new ideas. So if you're interested in joining the team, please contact Elaine Price at County Planning. Please note that today's sessions are being recorded for future access. The presentation materials and the recordings will be posted on the GC Trails website within a week, so look out for that. If you would like to still participate in the final virtual session right after this, you can go to the GC Trails website and register to get the Zoom link. There is still room available on the mobile workshops in the afternoon, so please register for those through the GC Trails website as well. One note about the Euclid Creek Trails mobile workshop. It is not at the address originally published in the Eventbrite description. So please meet at the Highland Picnic Area Shelter, which is at the north end of the Euclid Creek Reservation, just next to the Highland Road entrance. This is a very cool behind the scenes tour of the trail under construction. So that's always a fun thing to see. I'll also note for the Nord Family Greenway walking tour and the bike tour right after that, that is meeting right in between the Tinkerville Student Center and the KSL Library on Case's campus. So in case any folks had trouble finding it yesterday or and would like to come today, that's where it'll be. So look out for that. Another note on the bikeway or the bike tour, helmets are mandatory. So please bring your own. We can't guarantee that any additional ones will be provided or that there'll be enough. So please bring your own helmet if you're planning to attend the Harrison Dillard bike tour. And the final piece of housekeeping before we get going with this session is that CEUs are available through the American Planning Association and the Outdoor Parks and Recreation Association. So more information is available on the GC Trails website about that as well. So yeah, with that, I will introduce our Grace Galucci. She is here to give the opening comments for the day. She is the Executive Director of the Northeast Ohio Area-Wide Coordinating Agency, which is the Metropolitan Planning Organization for Greater Cleveland. Ms. Galucci has been with NOACA since 2012 and has nearly 30 years of experience in finance and planning in the field of transportation. Her career includes 5 years as Deputy Executive Director and Chief Financial Officer for the Chicago Regional Transportation Authority and 15 years with the Greater Cleveland Regional Transit Authority, including 5 years as the Executive Director of the Office of Management and Budget. So with that, please give a warm virtual welcome to Grace Galucci.
Thank you so much, David, and thank you all for being here this morning and throughout the day. We very much appreciate your interest in learning about the various ways that organizations around the region are working together to fund and develop more trails and greenways in Northeast Ohio. NOACA is a member of the Cuyahoga Greenway Partners and is proud to be a part of the planning team for the Greater Cleveland Trails and Greenway conferences, including this virtual mini conference taking place yesterday and today. We'd like to thank all of the other groups that help make these conferences possible, including the Cuyahoga County Planning Commission, the Cleveland Metro Parks, Cleveland City Planning, West Creek Conservancy, the National Park Service, Rails to Trails Conservancy, and Bike Cleveland, along with many other individual volunteers. And thank you specifically to Elaine Price of the Cuyahoga County Planning Commission for the tremendous work she does in bringing all of these partner organizations together to make this possible. So NOACA is, as David said, the metropolitan planning organization for Greater Cleveland. What that means is we are the federally designated organization for transportation planning and funding. We work very hard with multiple local partners in order to get those things done. We have a vision statement that says NOACA will strengthen regional cohesion, preserve existing infrastructure, build a multimodal transportation system that is sustainable, and for the purpose of economic development and quality of life. And we recently completed our long-range plan, ENEO 2050. And as we lay out in that plan, and more recently in our bicycle and pedestrian planning report, Activate, NOACA is committed to maintaining, enhancing, and expanding the region's multimodal transportation network and is actively planning and working towards coordinating and funding improvements to our non-motorized transportation network. We have a number of very significant projects that we've recently completed and some more on the way. For example, NOACA has recently been part of the team that completed the towpath trail, with NOACA having contributed $30 million to that project. And actually, if you put in the towpath trailhead, we're probably at closer to 31 million. That's the single largest contribution NOACA has made to any project in its history, more than any bridges, more than any roadways, public transit. We have a commitment to bicycle and pedestrian infrastructure and to trails specifically that allow you to connect to various destinations and origins, particularly in allowing people to make those connections in that multimodal way. So expanding our list of major projects, we've got a few things such as the Superior Midway on the docket, and we've got the Lorraine Avenue cycle track and a number of other initiatives. And if you want to learn more about that, go to ENEO 2050's webpage, which is connected to NOACA, or you can find it on NOACA's webpage. And to talk a little bit more about how we expand the active transportation network, and doing that in our region helps us to promote greater equity and sustainability. And we do that by improving mobility for people of all ages, improving health outcomes by enabling an active lifestyle, connecting people and jobs, reducing household and transportation greenhouse gas emissions, moving more people in the same amount of road space, and alleviating traffic congestion. You know, I want to speak to specifically air quality and emissions and how trails and bicycle pedestrian facilities are really helping to move the needle on climate action. NOACA is currently in the process of developing a climate action plan for the region. You also can get on our website and contribute some ideas to that process. In our presentation today, Bev Burtzlaff, Manager of Government Affairs, and Jim Thompson, Interim Manager of Capital Affairs, will focus on opportunities to fund these important trail and greenway projects, specifically covering what's in the new Bipartisan Infrastructure Law and how communities and organizations can work with NOACA to advance trail planning and projects. With that, I'll turn it over to Bev and to Jim.
Thank you, Grace, for your welcoming remarks. Thank you, Dave, for moderating this morning. And thank you all for attending this session. We appreciate your interest in learning more about the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act and NOACA's strategy for coordinating a regional approach to accessing some of those funds, especially the grant dollars in that law. But before we get to that, I do want to say a few more words about NOACA, who we are, what we do, and what's in our most recent long-range plan, ENEO 2050, which Grace just referenced. I'm going to share my screen here. Let's see. And get this to work. Okay.
Hey, real quick, Bev, I just want to jump in and say that if during the presentation you have any questions, please use the Q&A function, and we'll be keeping an eye on that. And then I'll be moderating the Q&A at the end of the session. So yeah, feel free to use that. Back to you, Beth.
Great. You can see my screen, correct?
Yes.
Good. Okay. So again, thank you all for coming. As Grace said, we are the federally designated metropolitan planning organization for Greater Cleveland, representing 2.1 million people, 5 counties, 166 cities, villages, and towns. The counties are Cuyahoga, Geauga, Lake, Lorain, and Medina that are part of our region. The organization, NOACA, is governed by a 48-member board of local elected officials, mayors, and county officials from throughout the region. We work with many planning partners, including FHWA, the Federal Highway Administration, the Federal Transit Administration, the Ohio EPA, and ODOT, and US EPA, county engineers, transit agencies, and local governments. So basically, NOACA helps determine how federal transportation dollars are spent in our region. So we conduct planning, transportation and environmental planning and approve transportation projects for federal funding. And we also allocate our own share of federal dollars, NOACA share of federal dollars, for regionally significant projects. So planning and funding are our 2 main functions, and that is done through, first of all, the federal law requires that we prepare and update continuously a 20-year long-range transportation plan. And then from that, we develop a 4-year transportation improvement program, and from that, develop an annual priority list. So, as Grace mentioned, our latest version of our long-range plan is ENEO 2050, an equitable plan for Northeast Ohio. And that is we actually laid out a 30-year plan. So we went beyond what was required to look out into the future and plan for the region's transportation network. We also recently were approved to develop another plan, a comprehensive economic development strategy, a CEDS plan. That's through the Department of Commerce's Economic Development Administration. So taken together, these 2 plans really help lay the groundwork for how we can be successful in accessing funding and programming funding from the IIJA, the new infrastructure law. So just a quick word on ENEO 2050, an equitable future for Northeast Ohio. That is our long-range transportation plan that envisions the future of the regional transportation network for the coming decades, and is guided by NOACA's vision statement. This ENEO 2050 was adopted by NOACA's board in June of 2021. And because I just mentioned it, I'm going to share once again NOACA's vision statement. Grace referenced it earlier, but NOACA will strengthen regional cohesion, preserve existing infrastructure, and build a sustainable multimodal transportation system to support economic development and enhance quality of life in Northeast Ohio. So with this plan, equity is a guiding principle. The plan builds on previous NOACA planning, but incorporates a much more comprehensive focus on equity. And the plan really examines the relationships between transportation and other facets of a resilient region, including land use, economic development, environmental quality, climate, and health. The plan was developed through a thorough public engagement process, which included targeted outreach to environmental justice communities. And I would note that was all done during the pandemic. So it was a challenge, but we worked very hard to get as much public input as possible into this plan. It did earn NOACA the 2021 National Award for Outstanding Overall Achievement for an MPO, awarded by the Association of Metropolitan Planning Organizations, known as AMPO. So that's like the highest honor among large MPOs. So we're really proud of our plan. One thing I wanted to mention is while this plan was being developed, Congress was deliberating on the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. And so we were kind of working, we were working on our plan at the same time this law was being developed. And it was interesting to note that when all was said and done, NOACA's long-range plan, ENEO 2050, the themes of our plan, I should say, really do align very closely with the themes of the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. Those themes of equity, access to multimodal transportation, mobility, safety, curbing emissions and improving air quality, asset management, and technology adaptation. So at this point, I'm going to turn this over to my colleague, Jim Thompson, and he's going to talk a little about, in more detail about our long-range plan, ENEO 2050. We're not going to take you through the whole plan, but he would like to focus a little bit on some of the aspects of this plan that really relate to trails and greenways, planning and funding. Jim?
Thank you, Bev. I appreciate that. Hi, everyone. I'm Jim Thompson, on staff here at NOACA, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about how NOACA's long-range plan, ENEO 2050, addresses a lot of the issues and opportunities that align with multimodal transportation, including trails development in the region. So as Bev mentioned, ENEO 2050 addresses various issues such as access, mobility, safety, emissions reduction, asset management, and technology adaptation. And the plan really looks forward to 2050 and how we can address a lot of these issues, and really focuses on doing so with strategies within each decade through 2050. So as you can see here, there are different strategies layered on each other throughout the decades, from 2020 to 2030, and then 2030 through 2040, and 2040 through 2050. So the goal in general is to ensure that we are addressing all these issues and we are layering on top of them. Next slide, Bev. This image comes straight out of our ENEO 2050 long-range plan. And really what it's saying is that in order to seek transportation equity, we have to look at all modes of transportation. That includes transit access, that includes single occupancy vehicles, as well as bicycles, pedestrians, micromobility, everything. And our strategy really is to review all of these different modes of transportation and ensure that they are incorporated in the 4 Ps. And so down below, you can see that those 4 Ps are plans, policies, programs, and projects. So then really the strategy is to ensure that we are reviewing plans, policies, projects, and programs while looking at each mode in order to strive to ensure that we have equity. And transportation equity means many things. It could mean equity for those of various incomes. It could mean equity based on ability or mobility, equity based on race, and really everything else. So we're really looking at this through various filters and various ways to ensure that we're seeking multimodal equity in transportation. Next slide. So for the next few slides, I'm going to talk about a handful of different ways that we address issues for multimodal transportation within ENEO 2050 specifically. We do look at the 6 E's of transportation safety for safety. And I'm sure you've all heard of the various E's, the 3 E's, I think a few years ago it was, and then now it was 4 E's and 5 E's and 6 E's. So as things develop, we try to be more inclusive and learn more things and try to see things through various lenses with our planning efforts. So focusing on the 6 E's of transportation safety, really we're starting with equity. We want to make sure that we're balancing our transportation options and access for all travelers through various lenses as I previously described. We're also looking at engineering. So which elements can be included in projects that promote safety for everyone. We don't just want to promote safety for vehicles. We want to make sure that we're looking at the safety of our pedestrians, our transit users, our cyclists, and so on. Education. So we know with a lot of these various changes that are happening with our transportation infrastructure as we evolve into the future, that there are new things out there. One example would be, give 3 feet for bicyclists if you're driving in a car. So we need to make sure that as we move forward, that we're educating all users of all modes on how to interact with each other in a safe and respectful way. Next is enforcement. So this comes down to usually police enforcement. It could come down to policies at the state level through the city level, but really it encourages all users to obey traffic laws and to make sure that they are operating in a safe manner in relation to themselves and each other. Next, emergency medical services, or EMS. So even though we are designing and engineering our facilities, in a way for all users, we still need to make sure that we can have safe and quick EMS access to all areas so they can essentially get to where they need to go to ensure safety for everyone in our communities. And then lastly, evaluation. So, we want to make sure that we're being equitable and designing safe facilities, but we also need to evaluate and looking at measures that can show that we are improving, and maybe measures that indicate that we're not improving. So really, with the evaluation, we want to look at continuous improvement of all facilities for all users to ensure more safety. I'd like to note on the far left side of the screen, we are addressing this at a regional level with planning, with safety planning, with policies, with programs, and with projects. So, within our NOACA SAVE plan, we address safety there. There are policies. We have Vision Zero, which is essentially a goal at the statewide level and also at the regional and local level to ensure 0 traffic deaths. We have various programs that address safety with transportation, such as ODOT's Safe Routes to School program, as well as our safety program. NOACA has our Safety and Operations Council, which reviews a lot of policies and projects through the lens of safety, and then also projects. So make sure that we are actually funding projects that encourage and improve safety for all users in the region. Next slide. There you go. Thanks, Bev. So ENEO 2050 also addresses complete and green streets. And at the regional level here at NOACA, we do have a policy and we do have programming for complete and green streets projects. So our complete and green streets policy, which is region-wide, was adopted in June of 2020. And really what it does is it seeks to promote multimodal transportation through design of roadway projects, and we're looking at ensuring that we are including the interest and the needs of cyclists, pedestrians, transit users, people of different abilities, school bus riders, Amish buggies, freight, emergency responders, and we want our roadways and all of our facilities to be able to be used by users of all ages and abilities. So that's really a lot to juggle, as you may know, for our very complicated transportation system. But this policy, kind of puts the rubber to the road, if you will, on how we will look at potential projects moving forward. And it is part of our program. Also, active transportation. So NOACA has an active transportation program, and we do seek to address that through our planning efforts, such as ENEO 2050 and other plans that we do that are both local and region-wide. And we also seek to promote projects, which are active transportation. Actually, the table there indicates from the plan different ways that region-wide we can address active transportation issues in a safe way. So by 2040, we're seeking to increase the amount of smart pedestrian crossings in the region, updating ramps to be ADA to meet ADA requirements. We want to increase high visibility crosswalks throughout the region, increase pedestrian signals at intersections, and also increase mid-block enhancements throughout the region. So there's various ways that NOACA's ENEO 2050 long-range plan addresses active transportation. And then on top of that, we have our Activate plan, which layers additional strategies for the region to have safer facilities and increase active transportation mobility throughout the region. Next slide. Transportation for Livable Communities, the TLCI program, which NOACA has managed since I think the first planning studies were started in 2006. So our program is getting near to being 20 years old at this point. But really what it does is it seeks to devise transportation-focused planning studies that address the problems and the needs of communities in the region. So it is a planning study program, and through that, projects will be recommended in the planning studies. And NOACA actually also has a TLCI implementation program, which essentially the intention of that is to construct some of those recommendations that come out of planning studies. This is a very popular program in the NOACA region. We actually are currently accepting applications for our implementation program, and those are due on October 7th. So if you're a community that has a TLCI planning study and you're interested in applying for some infrastructure funding through NOACA, feel free to get in touch with our office. But essentially, some examples of TLCI planning studies, they really focus on corridor and complete streets projects, bicycle and pedestrian issues and projects, transit issues and projects, green space connections, as well as redevelopment. So I believe we have about 150 TLCI planning studies that have been completed through the years. And we have about 75 implementation projects that we've funded since 2015. So this is a very popular program that is regional for the NOACA region, and it really does address a lot of issues that connect to greenways, trails, and many multimodal users. Next slide. So ENEO 2050 also addresses transit-oriented development, and this is essentially something that is important for users. Density is something that is very important for successful transit use in a region such as ours. And so this is noted within our ENEO 2050 plan. We do have our scorecard, which is essentially similar to a policy, which seeks various areas throughout the region which have strong potential for transit-oriented development, where dense developments can be constructed near high-use transit lines. I know that NOACA has worked with GCRTA and the City of Cleveland and various other partners on trying to be strategic about where these projects can be constructed, such that they are taking advantage of our strong transit system here, as well as providing opportunity for more dense development in our urban areas. And it does seek to work with partners on developing these projects. Next slide. Micromobility and ride sharing. So this is a place, this is something that has gained a lot of traction over the past years nationwide. And really what micromobility, ride sharing, van pool, there's a lot of pieces of this, but it's really seeking to connect a lot of individuals, particularly commuters, those seeking education advancement, for their first and last mile connections to their jobs, places of education, even doctor's appointments. So there are many, transit cannot get to all destinations, especially in Northeast Ohio, but it can get you most of the way. And so say that your doctor's office is a mile or so from the nearest transit stop, then how do we get you from that transit stop to your doctor's office? Well, there are options, and we're trying to increase those options for people. I know that scooters and bike share and e-bikes are something that are kind of newer to the scene here the past 5 or 10 years, and we're really seeing that here in Greater Cleveland, which is great. But we really want to make sure that we're being focused on encouraging the locations of some of these options for users at places where they will be used a lot, and to support our transportation network and our transit lines. NOACA recently started our van pool program, in which we are really seeking to connect individuals who can't get to work via fixed route transit to get to work. And so that's something that's getting off the ground now. We have a handful of van pools that are started, and we're taking on more, and we're really excited about that. But that's something that there's a need there, and we really want to make sure that we're supporting those who either don't have a vehicle or choose not to use a personal vehicle in order to commute to work. And that really also helps the employers too, because it helps to ensure that their employees are getting to work on time. So there's various ways that we are supporting micromobility and ride sharing, and this is something that's really evolving in real time, and we're excited to be part of a lot of these projects. Next slide. Okay, so that's all I have to say for now. Now I'll turn it back over to Bev to talk more about how the IIJA/BIL really is addressed kind of at our regional level here. Oh, Bev, I think you're still muted.
Okay, thanks, Jim. Yeah, thank you. That was a great explanation of the parts or the components of our long-range plan that really tie into trails and greenways and multimodal transportation. And it's important to understand that, because when we start to seek funding from the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, any grant applications that go in from our region need to show that they are either contained in, the projects either need to be contained in our long-range plan or the 4-year TIP, or these projects need to be at least consistent with our long-range plan. So when the federal government starts to evaluate applications for grant funding, they're going to ask, first of all, is your project in the TIP or the long-range plan or consistent with that? So that's why it's important to understand what's in that long-range plan. So like I said, that the plan really lays the groundwork for seeking funding under this new law. So real quickly, as I'm sure all of you know by now, the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, which is often called the BIL, the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, was approved by Congress and signed by the President last November. It reauthorized the previous Surface Transportation Law, the FAST Act, for an additional 5 years, so it goes through 2026. In total, the bill authorized $1.2 trillion of spending over 10 years, of which about half of that goes to transportation. I'll also point out that only about half of that $1.2 trillion is new spending, meaning above baseline, above what we had been spending, until the passage of or enactment of this new law. So it's not all new spending. A lot of this is just a continuation of current spending. About half is new spending. And out of that half, about $284 billion goes to surface transportation programs. This, I like this graphic because it really helps you to visualize. Out of that $1.2 trillion, you can see about half of that is new spending. And then that new spending is divided pretty much half and half between surface transportation funding and then other core infrastructure programs. But the bill does represent a historic investment in our nation's infrastructure. More than transportation, it does include drinking water and wastewater provisions and energy provisions. It streamlines permitting while maintaining environmental standards. What they call the one federal decision was codified. It increases core transportation formula funding, the funding that goes out to the states and some to the MPOs. And it adds new formula programs for carbon reduction, resiliency, bridges, and EV charging. There is an increased focus on the American workforce and jobs, and there are Buy America provisions. And there's a major increase in discretionary grant dollars, which is mostly what we're here to talk about today, all these grant programs that were created in this new law. So here, like I said, there are a lot of other new spending in this law that is not traditional surface transportation. So I just wanted to point out there is increased funding for transit and passenger rail, of course, but there's also funding for broadband, energy infrastructure, resiliency, water infrastructure, airports, and ports. This graphic shows a breakdown of the funding for all modes of transportation or all forms of transportation. So you can see, the relative breakdown in those various modes of transportation. Roads and bridges gets the largest amount of funding in this bill, but rail, passenger rail saw a significant increase, and transit saw a decent increase. So in terms of active transportation, I'll point out a few things. The new law did provide a 70% boost for the Transportation Alternatives Program for sidewalks, bike lanes, trails, and other active infrastructure. That's formula funding. There was an increase to the RAISE grant program, which I'll talk a little more about in a moment. There are a couple new grant programs, and I'll talk in more detail about those as well. There's an update to the manual on uniform traffic control devices, which involves more inclusion, mobility for all users, and protecting vulnerable road users. There are new crash reporting standards to capture the causes of pedestrian deaths and new vehicle safety provisions. And there's another program that we don't know a whole lot about yet, the Active Transportation Infrastructure Investment Program. That program is subject to appropriation, so the funding isn't automatic. And so we're trying to learn more about that program. In terms of the grant programs that really are most applicable to this audience, to developing trails and greenways, I would say, the three most important programs are the Safe Streets for All users, the Reconnecting Communities Pilot grant program, and the RAISE program, Rebuilding American Infrastructure with Sustainability and Equity. So I'll just talk a little bit about the Safe Streets for All program. This is a new discretionary grant program. The first round of funding applications just closed like last week, and it funds both planning and implementation grants. The purpose is to improve roadway safety by significantly reducing or eliminating roadway fatalities and serious injuries through safety action plan development and implementation focused on all users, including pedestrians, bicyclists, public transportation users, motorists, personal conveyance and micromobility users, and commercial vehicle operators. The program provides funding to develop the tools to strengthen a community's approach to safety and to save lives. Eligible applicants can be an MPO, a political subdivision, so for example, a city or a county, a multi-jurisdictional group of the entities described above can partner on grant applications. Those are for the planning grants. Now, looking at implementation grants, eligible applicants would be any of those listed above, but they have to show that they actually have ownership and or maintenance responsibility over the facilities they're seeking to fund or to upgrade. They have to be they have to be an eligible applicant with safety responsibilities that affect roadways or have agreement from the agency that has ownership and or maintenance responsibilities for the roadway within the applicant's jurisdiction. So you always have to really look at these NOFOs that come out from the infrastructure law. The NOFOs are the Notice of Funding Opportunities. These have been rolling out every month since the law was enacted. And when those come out, you want to read those very carefully to make sure that you are an eligible applicant. So for this round of Safe Streets for All funding, there was really no regional priority project that rose to the top. So NOACA did not identify a regional priority. So when, for that reason, I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in a minute about the approach here and our strategy. But suffice it to say that when there's no regional priority project, then NOACA supports other applications from local communities. So for instance, in this latest round, NOACA supported the City of Cleveland's application for an implementation grant for its Vision Zero plan. We supported the City of Cleveland Heights. They applied for a planning grant to develop a safety plan. And Lorain County Department of Public Health applied for a planning grant. So we supported all of those, and we documented that they were consistent with our long-range plan. And another grant program that's important for that can be useful for trails and greenways development is the Reconnecting Communities Pilot Discretionary Grant Program. The purpose of this program is to reconnect communities by removing, retrofitting, or mitigating transportation facilities like highways and rail lines that create barriers to community connectivity. The grant program provides technical assistance and funding for planning and capital construction to reconnect communities. So some examples are public transportation projects, infrastructure removal, pedestrian walkways and overpasses, capping and lids, linear parks and trails, roadway redesigns, complete streets conversions, and Main Street revitalization. So eligible applicants for the planning grants are states, local governments, MPOs, and nonprofits. Again, eligible applicants for construction would be facility owners or a planning grant recipient as co-applicant with the owner of the facility. So this grant program is currently open. Applications close October 13th, 2022. So coming up in a couple weeks. And now I'm going to talk a little about the RAISE grant program, the Rebuilding American Infrastructure with Sustainability and Equity. Now this program, unlike the last two, is not new to the IIJA. This program has existed prior to the IIJA. It was previously known and under different names. It was known as the BUILD program and the Tiger program before that. It funds road, rail, transit, and other surface transportation projects of local or regional significance. Selection criteria include safety, sustainability, equity, economic competitiveness, mobility, and community connectivity. In the 2022 round, the recipients were just recently announced. DOT awarded $2.2 billion for 66 projects across the nation, including 4 in Ohio. NOACA and the City of Cleveland were co-applicants for a project that we submitted. Unfortunately, our project was not chosen, but we're not deterred. We are still committed to this project and we will apply again. It's important to remind people that there are 5 years of funding under this new law, and presumably after the IIJA, there will be another law to replace it. So you have to look long term, and you have to
Marsha, call the operator. Marsha, call the operator.
You have to look long term, and you have to realize that many projects The applicants have sought funding under various grant programs once, twice, even 3 times before they're finally chosen and funded. So there is a little bit of a, 3 times the charm with some of these federal grants. So the fact that you don't win an award your first time out or even your second time out shouldn't deter you. So we remain committed to this project. This was our regional priority in the 2022 round of raised grant funding. We were really excited about this project. We still think it's a great project. It was intended to be the pilot project to demonstrate NOACA's new complete and green streets policy. We still hope that will happen. The project elements include, so it was to rehabilitate East 66th Street from Euclid Avenue north to Superior. The elements include multi-purpose trail with porous asphalt, 6-foot wide sidewalks and pedestrian crossings, pollinator plantings and new trees, bike and scooter parking and benches. And we like to note that this was the part of the one of the great features of this project was that it was going to really create a multimodal tributary from neighborhoods in Cleveland to the Euclid corridor bus rapid transit line and the bike facilities along Euclid Avenue. So it really has a lot of potential for connecting people to jobs, education, and healthcare. So just a couple examples of projects that did win awards in this latest round. New Carrollton, Maryland, for example, their multimodal transportation station project was funded. Atlantic City, New Jersey had a project funded. They both have elements that relate to multimodal transportation and resiliency, and some of the other aspects of this grant program. So there's one other grant program out there, but it was not part of the IIJA. It was recently enacted just last month as part of the Inflation Reduction Act, or the IRA. This is the Neighborhood Access and Equity Grants Program. So it's so new, we don't know much about it yet. We're waiting on guidance from US DOT to see how this will play out. But $3 billion was authorized to rework overbuilt roads and make them safer and more accessible to various modes, to reconnect communities, to mitigate negative impacts of transportation facilities, such as pollution, and to support equitable transportation planning. So I just wanted to mention this one, even though it's not part of the infrastructure law, but this looks like it has some real potential for some really good projects. Some examples that we're hearing could be funded with this new program are things like covering a highway or converting it to a boulevard, adding bike lanes, providing better connections to transit, build green stormwater infrastructure, add new safety features. One thing that is notable is these dollars cannot be used to build single occupant vehicle car lanes. So more to come, like I said, from US DOT. So now I want to talk a little bit about the strategy that NOACA is developing to help our region be successful under the new law. So NOACA, as the federally designated MPO, we've developed a strategy to coordinate a regional approach to all these funding opportunities. I've just mentioned a few here because of the ones that relate to trails and greenways, but the IIJA contains, over 30 new grant programs that relate to transportation. So we wanted to be strategic about how our region approaches this funding and try to ensure that we are as successful as possible. We took a lot of our guidance on this from the administration after the law passed just almost a year ago. The administration put out a lot of guidance and this fact sheet for building a better America under the new law. And they specifically note getting ready to apply for and receive federal infrastructure funds. It's a shared endeavor. No one can do it alone. Investing federal infrastructure dollars requires significant coordination between cities, states, community stakeholders, and other key partners. It's further states cities can begin to coordinate across their departments and with metropolitan planning organizations to prioritize the community's capital needs and develop a project pipeline, taking time to think about the projects previously considered impossible due to lack of funding or regional coordination. This is a once-in-a-generation funding opportunity that will require bold, inclusive thinking. The guidance states we should use the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law guidebook to identify these federal funding streams to target, and we should ensure that all transit, railway, road, highway, bridge projects are part of the MPO's transportation improvement program or our long-range plan. So that's why the long-range plan is so important and why we spend some time talking about it, because really what this is telling us is that regions should look to, our long-range plan, like I said, it plans out for 30 years and it contains a lot of great projects that that the community has decided are important for Northeast Ohio, but for which funding has not yet been identified. So this new law really provides a chance for us to look at that long-range plan, pull out those projects that are the highest priority for our region, sort of coalesce around those projects and try to seek funding for them. The purpose of this strategy, beyond, following the advice of the feds, which I just showed you, is to fulfill the NOACA's MPO legal role and responsibilities, to provide a transparent, strategic, and coordinated approach to funding opportunities. So to ensure that our highest priorities are pursued. Like I said, those projects in our long-range plan that are great projects, they're sitting out there, they need funding. Our strategy is also intended to really develop a pipeline of strong projects for funding, projects that are at the appropriate stage of readiness based on planning, engineering, and NEPA action. Not every project's ready to go out for funding. It's got to have appropriate planning behind it before the feds will consider it. The purpose of the strategy also is to maximize the total amount of federal funding that comes back to Northeast Ohio and to promote equitable distribution of resources. And when we say equitable, as Jim was saying earlier, we mean modal, geographic, economic development, and environmental justice equity. So the funding strategy intends the way it works is we're developing a transparent 5-year plan for project applications. This plan, which we will take to our board either later this year or early next year, will identify projects that are included in the long-range plan that meet that project readiness, feasibility requirements, projects that are eligible based on the criteria in each one of those notice of funding opportunities, and projects that reflect public and stakeholder engagement. And then we will prioritize projects based on criteria that's been established by NOACA, by the NOACA board, based on regional benefit and based on equity. So how do we get there with our strategy? The first step is increasing awareness of the funding opportunities and the MPO process. We have created a web page on the NOACA website. I'll show you that in a couple moments. And then we plan to do outreach via public forums like today's event. So this is a great opportunity for us to talk about our strategy and for all of you to learn about it. We next will develop a draft project list. We will look at ENEO 2050 and projects contained in that long-range plan through 2027. We will categorize projects by potential funding program, eligibility, and purpose. So we'll start matching up projects to all these different 30-some grant programs. Then we will coordinate this draft project list with regional and local sponsors, meaning, where the project is located. We'll talk to those mayors, those county officials to verify feasibility, readiness, scope, schedule, and costs for identified projects. We will acknowledge proposed projects that are maybe not in the long-range plan, but that could be added through a regular amendment process for our long-range plan. So just because a project isn't currently in the long-range plan doesn't mean it couldn't be considered as a regional priority project for grant funding. We do amend our plan. We will then prioritize and rank these projects and looking at which projects provide the greatest benefit for the most people, using our regional benefit criteria and our equity criteria. We will ensure that there is public and stakeholder engagement once we have a final draft list of which projects we want to move forward with through these funding opportunities. And then we will determine NOACA's level of action. There will be times where NOACA will be an applicant, either the sole applicant or a co-applicant. There will be times when we will not be an applicant, but we will provide that letter of support or approval to say that the plan is, or that the project is consistent with NOACA's long-range plan. And there must be a demonstration of written approval by the impacted communities and jurisdictions that would be affected by the project. We are trying to be very clear, get the word out to everybody that if you're seeking a letter of support from NOACA for your project, it must be requested at least 2 weeks prior to the application deadline. So we can review it and make sure it's consistent with our long-range plan. And then, we can also, look at what other projects are going in on that round of funding. Step 7 will be adoption. After the NOACA committees have considered, there will be approval by the NOACA board, and the strategy will be subject to a quarterly amendment process. So it can always be updated. It's not completely static. And then implementation. So we will maintain this project list on our website and work with project sponsors. So anyway, I guess the bottom line to all this is, how can communities work with NOACA to access IIJA funding? And I think the overall theme here is communication. I mean, the more we talk to you and the earlier we talk to communities and project sponsors, I think the better we can help this region to be successful. So NOACA can help provide assistance with an application for funding. We can evaluate the project against the federal criteria and make sure it's eligible. We can coordinate with ODOT if needed. We can evaluate your project readiness. We may provide data to justify your project, and we may provide that letter of support that the federal agencies are looking for. And again, the project for NOACA support, to support it, needs to be in the long-range plan. And then projects across the region may need to be prioritized for each funding opportunity if there are multiple applications being submitted. So I'll just say here, one thing that we have learned is that the regions that are most successful in getting grant funding are the ones that are more united, that sort of unite behind one priority project per round of funding. So, take the RAISE program, for example. The regions that seem to be the most successful are the ones that, instead of submitting multiple applications, submit one application, or where one application comes from the region that has support from the stakeholders in that region. Otherwise, what happens is you have multiple applications from the same region basically competing against each other. federal agencies aren't likely to fund more than one project from a region. I'm not saying they never do, but it's tenuous at best that they're going to fund more than one project from a particular MPO region in any one given round of funding. So what we want to do is basically help coordinate your projects so that we're not all competing against each other, and look at the long, look over the long haul with the IIJA and the full 5 years of funding, and maybe stage some projects so that we're not all going in the same year competing against each other for projects in the same round of funding. So that's really the purpose of this plan, and we really just want to help all of your projects to be successful and our region to be successful. Here is our web page on the NOACA website. If you go to NOACA's website and just go to the search bar and type in NOACA IIJA funding strategy or IIJA, this will come right up. And I also want to say that we're going to have a more in-depth discussion of applying for federal grants through the IIJA at our upcoming annual meeting and symposium, which is going to be held on October 7th. Actually, we're going to start at 9 a.m., even though this graphic says 10. At 9 a.m., we're going to have a new session that was just announced to talk about, how NOACA can help communities get their projects funded through the IIJA, how our community can pull together to receive funding, some tips on applying for grants, and more. So if you are able to attend our annual meeting and you can arrive for this 9 a.m. session, I think you'll find it really helpful if you're interested in accessing funding from the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. And we've got some exciting guests coming. The whole theme of the day is bipartisanship to create world-class infrastructure and enable our region to compete globally. So that's the end of our presentation, and we're happy to entertain any questions now.
Yeah. Thank you again, Bev and Jim and Grace for speaking. It was a very informative presentation, and I certainly learned a lot. I will say to the attendees here, if you have any questions, remember to use the Q&A function down at the bottom of the screen for Zoom. But with that said, I'll start getting into the questions that have been asked so far. The first question I'll bring up is, this is a question from Laura, who says, can NOACA partner with AMATS, or the Akron Metropolitan Planning Organization, to support trail connections to the towpath trail? So I guess, yeah, how does NOACA coordinate with other MPOs, neighboring MPOs, or other organizations within the area to coordinate on these types of projects? Not sure who wants to pick that one up.
I can take a stab, but Jim, if you want to weigh in too. NOACA works very closely with other regional organizations throughout the state. We all belong to a statewide organization, the Ohio Association of Regional Councils. We work with AMATS and talk to AMATS and all the other regional councils around the state. So yes, there is potential for, I think, two MPOs or regional councils to come together to support something that maybe crosses, jurisdictional lines like that. So that there's definitely potential there. Did you have anything to add, Jim?
No, I think you said that pretty well. I guess just going a little bit in more depth about OARC. We do also coordinate with all of the large metropolitan planning organizations when it comes to dedicating CMAQ funding. That's congestion mitigation air quality funding, which is one of our programs. Actually, it's the program that mostly supported funding for the towpath trail from NOACA. So that is something that we coordinate with, at least that funding stream, on a biannual basis when we have applications available.
Great, thank you both. So moving on to the next question, also from Laura. So are metro parks or the Cuyahoga Valley National Park eligible applicants for the Reconnecting Communities discretionary grant program? The Red Line Greenway would have been a good regional project. So on that note, the Red Line Greenway was a NOACA funded project, which does connect to the towpath. So we are working on that. But I guess the question, to reframe it a little bit, so can you both speak maybe more about what types of organizations are eligible to apply for each of these grant programs, or where people can find that information on who's eligible?
Yeah. I'll start, and Jim or Grace, if you want to add on to this. I mean, for most of these grant programs, MPOs and cities and other local jurisdictions are eligible to apply for this funding. I know that the IIJA also does have some specific funding programs for federal, for national parks and other federal lands. So there are, I think, additional funding opportunities for trails and greenways that are actually in a national park. In terms of metro parks, yes, they would be eligible to apply for many of these programs as well.
I do want to emphasize, though, that the projects and the programs that are offered under USDOT, the Department of Transportation, many of them are specifically geared towards transportation connectivity. And so they may not necessarily have eligibility for the recreation components of the work that the parks do. But as an entity, yes, the metro parks are all eligible.
Great. So moving on to the next question here. So how can we get an explanation of the various new bike and pedestrian facilities and features, as well as the rules and driver responsibilities into Ohio drivers education? So with all these new, trail and greenway projects coming about, new designs, that were talked about, yesterday during the ODOT presentation. Is there a way to ensure that how drivers should interact with these new multimodal roadway features into the standard Ohio driver's education program? Is that something that we can work on?
That seems like a question better suited for the state. Certainly NOACA has a plan that is a safety plan. And within that safety plan that is called SAVE, we do have some initiatives and actions proposed around education and outreach. And we will certainly look to include the kinds of things that you just referenced.
Great. Okay, so moving on to question number 4. So how should a community interact with NOACA to gain NOACA's support or endorsement on one of these grant applications? I know we spoke about it a little bit, but maybe we can just reiterate, again, how should organizations interact with us to get our support?
Well, I think Bev mentioned earlier that we have developed this regional strategy for accessing the IIJA funds. And so the interaction with us really needs to follow the prescription that we are developing. And as Bev noted, we will be having a session on October 7th from 9 to 10 that will go into great detail around the strategy. We will be having further workshops and input. And there is a web page, as Bev noted, on the IIJA and how to interact with NOACA on that. But the key is that as the Metropolitan Planning Organization, our support is a little bit different than the support of other organizations that you may also seek. We really need to be aligned with the organization applying, and they need to be aligned with us in our long-range plan. And so there really is a lot of work that has to be done to get that alignment, to get in that alignment, and come October 7th and learn more.
Great. Yeah, looking forward to that. And at the moment, we just have one last question. So if you want to have a question answered, make sure you put it in the Q&A, and we'll take a look at it and answer it real quick. But our last question for now is, when will applications for the Inflation Reduction funding open?
Yeah, I don't think we know that yet. I mean, the new Inflation Reduction Act was just signed into law about a month ago. So it takes the agencies, the federal agencies, a little bit of time once the new law is enacted to go through and promulgate regulations and give and provide that guidance. So we'll be watching that closely, and you know, you're welcome to check back in with us, and as we learn more, we'll try to be as helpful as possible. So
Great. Okay, well, at this point, I'm not seeing any more questions. I guess just to sort of follow-up remark, earlier I noted that I tried to clarify the location for the Euclid Creek Trails mobile workshop. Just want to make it a little bit more clear that so the Highland Picnic area is at the corner of Highland Road and Euclid Creek Parkway in Euclid Creek Reservation. I'm about to drop a link to that location in Google Maps. So, take a look at that. Just posted that. Yeah, so with that overall, I just want to, thank Bev, Jim, and Grace for being here today to speak with you all. And I guess, Elaine, do you have any follow-up remarks before the session ends? If you wanna hop on, but.
No, thank you, everyone. Really appreciate you being here. We appreciate everyone who participated in the session. As Dave mentioned, we will have an in-person session, in-person conference in 2023. We are looking for new people to join our committee. We want to get a lot of input, particularly from our communities, about what are the topics that you would like to see discussed and learn more about. And hope that you can attend the next session, which is on the county-wide sign plan. So it's really going to be a great resource. The work has already gone into designing great signs for trails and bikeways and neighborhood greenways as part of the county-wide network. We'll be hearing about that, and then the mobile workshops this afternoon. So again, we'll send out any follow-up information. Dave, I'll work with you directly, but we need to get people to that October 7th workshop so everyone can understand how to work as part of the NOACA process. So thanks very much.
Yes. All right. Well, thank you to the presenters again. Thanks to Elaine, and thanks to everyone who was able to join us today. So hope to see you at the mobile workshops later. Thank you.
Bye.